Welcome to probably the slowest electric drag race in the world. Here we go, I'm off!
Hang on, before we do that, we should probably run you through our contenders. And just before that, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and if you want to buy any new car, head over to whatcar.com to get yourself a great deal. Now, you might have noticed I emphasised the word car because although the vehicles we're focusing on today have four wheels and a steering wheel, they aren't technically cars at all. They're classed as quadricycles. A quadricycle has to weigh less than half a tonne, excluding batteries in the case of these electric versions, and they don't have to pass the same rigorous regulations a normal passenger car does. One of the reasons they're normally much cheaper to buy. And this is the new Citroen Ami. Citroen hasn't decided if it's going to be selling it in the UK or not yet, and believe it or not, it can actually be driven by 14-year-olds. Bit of a scary thought. It is a little bit less than 2.5 metres long and 1.4 metres wide, and it weighs about 485k, so less than half that of a Ford Fiesta. And it's a bit of a head turner, isn't it? So the panel at the front of the car and the one at the rear, they're actually interchangeable to reduce costs. And it makes it a little bit difficult to work out which way it's pointing, unless it's driving along, of course. The doors also, they are interchangeable, so the one on the driver's side is hinged at the rear, and again, that's to reduce costs. The Ami has a 5.5 kilowatt hour battery. For context, that's around a tenth of the capacity of the one you'll find in the new Volkswagen ID.3, and it has a claimed range of 44 miles on a charge. The 0-60 time, well, there isn't one. But while the Ami may only have an official top speed of 28 miles an hour, how quickly it gets there could be the deciding factor in this drag race.
But if it's speed you want from your electric quadricycle, then step right this way. The Renault Twizy is one of the Citroen Ami's main competitors, and it was first launched in 2012. It's got a whopping 17 brake horsepower electric motor driving the rear wheels. It's also got a 45-mile electric range from its 6 kilowatt hour battery. It weighs 474 kilograms and has a top speed of around 50 miles an hour. But all that pace does come at a price. At £12,000, it's quite a bit more expensive than the Citroen Ami. You've also got to pay extra for the doors.
Now, you might be vaguely familiar with our first two contenders, but I'm betting you haven't heard of this. It's called the Micro Electric, and you can think of it as the Rolls-Royce of electric quadricycles. It was launched in 2019, and it's fairly luxurious compared with an Ami or a Twizy. So if you go for this top spec model, you get quite a few creature comforts actually. You get air conditioning, you get electric windows, a reversing camera, and even a panoramic roof. It also comes with a 10 kilowatt hour battery that gives a respectable range of 95 miles on full charge, and the 10 brake horsepower electric motor that can drive the Micro Electric along at speeds of up to 48 miles an hour. By electric quadricycle standards, it isn't cheap. It costs about the same as a Twizy, so just under £12,000, but you do get doors as standard.
But this is the electric quadricycle that started it all. It's the Indian-built Reva G-Wiz, and it first went on sale around 20 years ago, and actually it was the best-selling electric car in the world until 2009. That was basically when another electric car went on sale. It had a slightly ambitious 50-mile claimed range, not much brake horsepower, apparently a top speed of around 40 miles an hour, and a weight of 665 kilograms. It doesn't have the best reputation, but you do still see quite a few around London today. But the big question here is, which of these electric quadricycles is the quickest in a drag race?
3, 2, 1, go!
Here we go, I'm off! My foot has almost gone through the floor.
I'm off!
I'm winning!
Micro Electric is caning off the line. I'm lagging behind, so clearly I just have to beat the Ami now. I have to beat the Ami.
This is the hot hatch of electric quadricycles.
Yes! See you later.
The Twizy might be gaining.
The other two have just totally pulled away. I'm not catching them, am I?
It is definitely gaining. It's definitely gaining. And I've won. I've won. Oh God, you tipped over.
There we go. Yes. Third place. All right, I'll take that. I'll take that. So what did we just see? Well, Off the line, even though it's apparently heavier and not as powerful as the Twizy, the Micro Electric absolutely rocketed away. The Ami also had a really strong start, while the G-Wiz, being the heaviest and oldest quadricycle in the race, was left in the dust. And it was the Micro Electric which crossed our 400-metre finish line first, taking 25.5 seconds to do so, followed very closely by the Twizy. Behind them, the G-Wiz recovered from its poor start and finished the sprint in 29.2 seconds, while the Ami was dead last in, wait for it, 35.2 seconds.
The Ami did make a very quick start, but once it hit its 27.9 mile an hour top speed, it was only a matter of time before the 40.5 mile an hour G-Wiz wheeled it in to claim third place. At the front of the grid, the Twizy recorded the highest top speed of 49.6 miles an hour, but because it took so long to get there, it finished second to the 44.6 mile an hour Micro Electric.
Now, what are these cars actually like to drive? Well, the obvious point to make is that they are very, very different from normal cars. Now, everything's a lot slower, you feel much more exposed, so it's kind of like you're driving a bike with windows, really. Now, with the Ami, yes, it isn't particularly quick, we've established that. But it goes about its business in a pretty tidy manner, to be honest. So it's got nice direct steering, it does feel reasonably agile. Yes, it's only got a 28 mile an hour top speed, which on a 40 mile an hour road is a slight issue. You will be a bit of a lorry magnet. But for the short journeys at low speeds that this is designed for, it actually feels pretty tidy. And the price that it is pretty remarkable. It is pretty basic in here, isn't it? So you've got material straps instead of door handles. You've got quite a lot of hard plastics all over the place as well. But it is styled relatively nicely, isn't it? With the bright colours that you've got, and you've got a load of storage up front. And actually this manages to feel the most spacious of the electric quadricycles that we've got here today. So they all have tiny footprints, including the Ami, but this actually feels more open than the others. So you're really far away from the windscreen, it feels. There's seating for two, there's also room for some shopping bags. It's not massive, but compared to the others, it does feel like it's got a bit of room inside. There is also a 3-pin plug hidden in the door here. Plus down here is where the gear selector is. So all in all, basic, but actually done quite nicely.
Now it's all relative, of course, so don't go expecting Tesla-style acceleration, but as we've just seen, the Twizy is reasonably nippy. It's certainly capable of keeping up with traffic in town, so you're not going to be annoying vans and lorries, which is a good thing when you're in something that's about the size of an egg box. And it's the only one of the vehicles here today that is legally allowed to drive on the motorway, although we really wouldn't recommend it. It's also quite good fun to drive through the corners. It feels more stable than you'd imagine for something this narrow, but there are two problems. One is it's very, very noisy. You can probably hear this whine in the background, and there's a lot of wind and road noise as well, because of course there are no proper windows, just these pieces of plastic, and they're optional. The other problem is the ride. It is pretty uncomfortable, to be honest. If you hit a speed bump or a pothole, it can be really quite painful, and it's not helped by the fact that these seats are quite firm. But for an electric quadricycle, it's pretty good. You can carry one passenger in the Twizy. They sit directly behind the driver here and kind of straddle the front seat. So not ideal if they've got long legs, but it does make the front feel broader than it does in some of the other cars, at least when you've got a passenger on board. The interior, this car does cost quite a lot more than the Ami, remember, but it doesn't really feel any more upmarket inside. But bearing in mind, this car doesn't come with windows as standard. You're likely to get a few leaves and bits of mud and stuff blown inside. So the fact that it's all hard plastic does mean that it wipes clean easily.
So the Micro Electric, or the Me, whatever you want to call it, it's sort of showing the other electric quadricycles up a bit, isn't it? We've seen that it might not have the highest top speed, but it is the fastest accelerating by quite some way. And also, it can go a lot further than the other cars on a full charge. Plus, it's got loads of equipment that it comes with as well. But what's it like to drive? Well, it is quite noisy in here. There's a lot of motor whine, and yes, you can accelerate quickly, but then if you go around a corner quickly, there is quite a lot of body roll. It doesn't feel particularly stable. And really, you are going to want to keep to pretty low speeds in a straight line in this thing, because the steering does not necessarily fill you with confidence, and there really is so much body roll in this thing, it's crazy. But stick to low speeds, it's quick, it'll go further than the others. Does it need to do much more than that? Now, the list of equipment might be fairly luxurious compared to the other cars, but you probably wouldn't describe this interior as plush. You've got some faux leather going on the seats here, which doesn't feel particularly great, and all these plastics on the dash and the steering wheel. It just doesn't really feel like car levels of plushness, let's say. But look, you've got an actual touchscreen, and really this is only a little bit worse than VW's latest infotainment system. There's also air conditioning, you've got a sunroof, but still, you're never gonna confuse this with an actual car. And the space inside, you have got seating for two, you've got no space in the back, and the boot is pretty tiny.
Now, the G-Wiz became a bit of a laughing stock during its lifetime, didn't it? And that's mainly because of the way it looks, but what's it actually like to drive? Well, there are some visibility issues, I'll be honest. The rear view mirror, it's a normal size, but it's so close to my face, it blocks a large proportion of what I can actually see, and I find myself peering round it to check that I haven't lost a pedestrian or a cyclist. And then, further down the windscreen, there's a windscreen wiper halfway up, so that blocks more of what you can see. Not great at all, and in other respects, it's not great to drive either. The ride is very bouncy, and although it doesn't feel as unstable as the Micro Electric through corners, compared with the Ami and the Twizy, both of those cars of course have been developed by mainstream manufacturers, it just doesn't feel particularly stable. It doesn't inspire much confidence, particularly when you get above about 30 miles an hour. And also the brake pedal, you need to give it a real shove down to get the car to stop properly. Now, the good news in the G-Wiz is that I can slide the driver's seat back far enough so I can get relatively comfortable. The bad news is there's very little headroom, so someone of my height will have their head resting on the roof lining all the time. There is quite a lot of storage space, so you've got deep pockets there, and you've also got another cubby at the base of the dashboard, and you've even got a couple of cup holders as well, so that's quite useful. But one other thing I want to show you. So a few decades ago, a man called Gordon Tullock came up with the theory that if car manufacturers were to fit a big spike in the centre of the steering wheel of new cars, that would actually reduce the number of fatalities, because everyone would be so worried about this that they'd slow down and they just generally drive more safely. And I think whoever designed this car has been inspired by that, because if you're in the passenger seat, if you're my height at least, then there is a grab handle right next to your head, and it's not the rubbery, forgiving type, it is rock hard. And even if you go around a corner and knock your head against it, it's quite painful. So if I were to have an accident in it, well, I don't really want to think about it. So that's not good. But remember, this is an old car now. So if you're looking at buying one of these second-hand, you'll be spending between £1,500 and £3,000, loads less than any of the other cars. And it is the only car as well that technically has 4 seats, although I'm not sure how 4 people could fit in here unless they were all 3 years old. If you are buying these, you'll want to go for the second generation model, which is called the G-Wiz I. This is that car, and that's because it has some chassis improvements that make it a little bit safer. But the bad news is it still has a old school lead acid battery rather than the lithium ion batteries that modern electric cars have. And the major problem with that is that it takes 10 hours to charge this from empty using a domestic 3-pin plug, whereas the other cars, they take around about 3 hours. Now, the serious point to ram home here is that these quadricycles are not cars, and because of that, they don't have to meet the same strict safety standards. Put simply, you really wouldn't want to have an accident in any of our Contenders, and the few crash tests that have been performed on quadricycles don't make for pretty viewing. And considering the Twizy and Mi Micro Electric cost around £12,000, they're even harder to recommend, because you could get a proper electric car like a Renault Zoe on the used market for that sort of cash. But should you be considering any of them? Well, we wouldn't advise it if you plan to venture out onto faster roads. On the other hand, if you're thinking about an electric quadricycle as a rainproof and slightly safer alternative to a motorbike for driving around the city, they can make sense.
In terms of which is the best one here, against the G-Wiz and the Micro Electric, the Twizy and Ami do feel like quadricycles made by proper car manufacturers with vastly bigger budgets and a lot more experience. If the Ami does eventually go on sale in the UK with a price as low as it is in France, then that would be our pick from this bunch. You certainly won't be winning any drag races, but for cheap city transport, it nails the brief pretty well. Tell us which electric quadricycle you would choose for yourself in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And if you do want to buy an actual car, go to whatcar.com to get a great deal.